What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be talking about movement and how you can use it to help you win more fights in Fortnite Zero Build. As always, if you guys do find this video to be helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and comment down below if you're someone who focuses on movement or if it's something that you've never really thought about. Because I think this is something that a lot of more experienced or better players definitely know that it's a very big deal. But a lot of newer players, when they play a shooter, they think like shooting is just far and away and aim is far and away the most important thing. And aim is important, but movement is also incredibly important and potentially just as important. A lot of this is just going to boil down to being as annoying as possible for enemies to deal with. You want to use your movement to hopefully throw off the opponent's aim or just make the fight as hard and as inconvenient as it can be for them. And one thing you really want to think about is when you fight someone who's annoying or difficult to track and you just don't really have an easy time tracking them, try to think about why that was and how you could incorporate that into your fights. I think that is a big one. And I'm saying annoying in like a negative, people see that in a negative context, but I mean it in a good way. When someone is difficult to track, think about why, try to emulate that into your own gameplay if you can. Think about it like this. If you were fighting an enemy that just stood there the whole time and just stood still, that would be much easier than someone who's like jumping and sliding around or using cover well, right? You want to be that second person, not the person that's just standing still. And probably the most important thing to improve your movement is just going to be being comfortable playing the game. And that's something that'll really develop over time. When I'm making spectating videos or just watching people play, this is something that really stands out super quick, and it is just very obvious watching someone for just a few seconds and seeing how they move their character, if they're comfortable moving their character around the map. And odds are, if they're not comfortable moving their character, then, and it doesn't like look fluid, you know, everything else is probably just going to be, you know, harder as well. Like a lot of newer players struggle to aim well while moving, and this really holds them back because they're not able to utilize movement well in fights. As you move your character, obviously this moves your crosshair as well, so being able to use a combination of your movement and like your actual aim on controller, it'll be like left stick for movement, right stick for aim, using your movement and your right stick in unison to aim and track opponents is an essential skill in Fortnite in pretty much any shooter I've ever played. And a lot of that just comes down to being comfortable. Like newer players feel like they have to stand still a lot of times to hit shots because they're not able to do like both at the same time. So if you are one of those people, I'm not trying to call you out, but just like I think you just have to play the game more and just get used to it. There are several settings though that can have a big impact on how your movement is. And I'm a controller player, so I'm going to talk about this from a controller player's perspective. The first is just going to be your keybinds, because you need to be able to do things like jumping or crouching without taking your thumbs off the stick. For this reason, the default crouch bind is not really ideal. Like the default jump bind, sorry. The default jump bind requires you to take your thumb off the right stick to hit it. And if you have to take your thumb off the right stick to hit X to jump, you probably can't aim at the same time that you're doing that. And a lot of advanced movement is going to require you to jump and like land in a slide and stuff. So for this reason, it's really hard to have ideal movement without a paddled controller. This is going to be a controller where there's buttons or paddles on the back that allow you to do those actions without taking your thumbs off the stick. I am sponsored by AIM controllers. There will be a link down in the description below where you can check them out, but they do make paddled controllers. Playing claw, which is where your index finger is on the triangle, circle, X square buttons at all times. This is personally how I play, and I've played since like 2008, 2009. It's kind of outdated now. This is something that was more popular before paddled controllers were a thing. Or just like getting creative with your keybinds in some way to find a solution to this. But it is imperative that you can jump and crouch without taking your thumb off the stick. That way you can do so while aiming at the same time. And that kind of adds into that like fluidity I talked about of using your aim and your movement together to hit shots. The slide hold time setting is also going to be a big deal. This is how long you have to hold your crouch button before you activate a slide. And the default of this means you have to hold that button for a good amount before sliding. And that just adds some amount of delay and could mess you up in some situations. So I would recommend having a lower slide hold time than what the default setting is. But not so low that you're accidentally doing it. You got to kind of find a medium there. Where you can slide fluidly and easily, but not accidentally slide when you don't intend to. Dead zones are another setting that can go a long way in improving your movement. A lot of people think of dead zones just as far as right stick dead zone for aiming, but your left stick dead zone also matters as well. This is how much you move the sticks before you start to register movement in game. The lower dead zone basically makes your controller more sensitive. That's going to make it easier for you to make fast, snappy movement. I think you want your dead zones as low as you can get them without getting stick drift, because if you set it incredibly low, it's possible the game will just register movement when you're not actually touching the controller. So you want it as low as you can get without getting stick drift. And then sensitivity also really matters, because one, you need a sensitivity that's fast enough to track moving enemy players. If it's just so slow that you can't track anybody, you're probably not going to be able to be, moving yourself and tracking people. But also you want to have a sensitivity that's low enough that you feel comfortable hip firing in those close range fights, because a lot of these movement fights are going to be close range fights. If your sensitivity is so high, or you're not comfortable enough with it that you can't hip fire and you feel like you need to aim in all the time, even in those close range fights, that's going to really impair your movement, because when you're aimed in, your character moves slower. And then you also can't be like jumping or sliding really. I guess you can slide while aiming, but like eventually, you know what I mean? You want to be able to feel comfortable tracking with the hip fire. And this is a big deal in close range fights, but it's also a big deal with like those movement fights as well. So finding a dead zone that works for you, lowering your slide hold time, finding some keybinds that allow you to jump or crouch without taking your thumbs off the stick, and then also finding a sensitivity that allows you to feel comfortable hip firing at close range can go a long way in improving your movement and like improving your ability to use movement in fights. So now that intro, this is like the intro and the starter stuff. Now that that's out of the way, playing around cover is a big deal of this game, and it's a big deal in how you can use movement to win fights in Fortnite. You want to move your character in such a way where you are peeking from the right as often as possible. The camera in Fortnite is slightly off center, so if you're peeking from the right, you don't have to expose as much of your character to shoot as someone who's peeking from the left. And a lot of this, people think about this mostly in terms of like a medium range AR fight, but it's even more so imperative when you're having a close range fight around like a tree or a wall or a pillar, whatever it is. There's a lot of close range fights in this game that happen around some piece of cover, and how you move in those situations can really determine whether or not you'll win the fight. If you're forcing yourself into situations where you're peeking from the left constantly, that's not as ideal as if you're peeking from the right, and it matters a lot in these situations as well as those longer range situations. If you are playing into an enemy's right shoulder peek, or you have to peek from the left for whatever reason just because the situation calls for it, what I often try to do is just jump wide and then break their camera. We'll get into what that means in a second. But playing slow into someone's right shoulder peek is one of the worst things you can do, because that's what they want. Imagine this: if you're playing around a tree, if the enemy just kind of slowly walks at you as you're like peeking from the right and chipping down shots on them, it's a much easier fight for you to play than if they like sprint jump and try to slide behind you, right? If you identify that you have to peek from the left for whatever reason, try to do so quickly and try to use your movement to make that fight harder for the enemy than it would be if you were just walking slowly at them. And when I said breaking someone's camera, what I mean is this is when you kind of like jump or slide to basically get behind them, and you're so behind them that it's like difficult for them to track, and you're potentially not even on their screen anymore because of the way the camera works in Fortnite. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of this, you know how awkward and weird it is to fight against, because like one, the person potentially disappeared, so you don't know where they are anymore, and then two, you need to make such a large adjustment to like get on them again, and some people aren't able to do that fast enough. And with how the shotguns work in this game, giving yourself a half-second advantage where the enemy doesn't see you is potentially enough to just straight up win the fight if your aim is decent. So getting in the habit of breaking people's camera, I think, is very important. And as I said, a lot of times this is going to be like you kind of sprint jump into a slide and end up behind them. And that's what I want to do as often as possible if I am in a situation where I'm forced into playing, peeking into someone's right peek. In some situations, you kind of can use the wall kicks and the rolling to make this happen as well. And that is pretty much the only time I've really used the wall kicks. It's not something I use a lot, and I was kind of disappointed with this feature being added. But there have been some situations where I was able to pull off a wall kick and then land in a roll and then end up behind the enemy. And in that situation, they just had no ability to win the fight. Anytime you're getting chased or an enemy is kind of pushing into you, that can be an easy opportunity to break their camera. If you go around a corner and you know they're chasing you, and then you time it so that as they come around the corner, you kind of like jump behind them, you can easily get the kill and throw people off in situations where maybe you were at the back foot. You know, you might have been weak. They're chasing you. If you just keep running, they're eventually going to kill you. If you don't look for an opportunity to turn the fight, and getting around a corner and then breaking their camera can definitely be that opportunity you're looking for to turn the fight and give yourself an advantage. And none of this, I feel like, is very complicated. It just comes down to being comfortable playing the game and being aware these situations can happen and kind of knowing when to utilize them. The movement items in Fortnite are a unique kind of aspect of Fortnite, I feel like, more so than other shooters. And these can also present situations for you to use your movement in a way that you win fights. Really depends on what the weapon is. The rocket drill, for example, there's not really that many ways you're going to be using that in a fight because you can't pull your gun out while you're in the air. But something like shockwaves, you can shockwave through walls and catch people off guard. Or, you know, the way you shockwave at somebody, maybe you land in a slide and have an opportunity to break their corner. The Typhoon Blade and Bat that we've had so far in Chapter 6, you have like a jump ability where you can kind of sprint jump with these, get high, and then take out your shotgun. And even just that sprint jump is also an opportunity for you to break the enemy's camera because you can easily end up behind them and like jump over their head with it. So learning how to utilize these movement items, whatever it is also something that you can use movement to get yourself an advantage and get yourself a win in fights that maybe otherwise would have been much harder to win. As I kind of already said, though, a lot of this is not rocket science. It just comes down to being comfortable enough to execute it and knowing what situations you can pull this off and identifying it quickly and then pulling it off in game. And a lot of this is just going to come down to playing a lot and getting in fights. And this is something I've stressed in so many videos where like a lot of newer players just try to hide and get wins because, you know, they really want to win. But by doing so, they don't get much experience fighting and they're kind of handicapping their development, you know, in the future. So if you do want to improve on all of this, I think you just need to get in as many fights as possible. That way you get as many reps possible and you can get as comfortable pulling all this off as fast as possible. So like playing aggressive can, you know, help. Reload mode can also be a little bit more time efficient in terms of getting in fights. And then creative mode, I think, is just the most efficient in terms of getting in fights as fast as possible. So any sort of like creative deathmatch that you can play, even if the reps aren't the best, like you just get in so many more reps so much faster that it improves your skill so much more than just playing BR alone, and so much more than playing BR specifically to get wins. Watching some of your fights back in replay mode can also really be helpful when it comes to this. A lot of times when people go into replay mode, they overanalyze things and it's very hindsighty and it's very I see a lot of people like looking for reasons why they shouldn't have died when they did. What I'm saying when I mean like replay mode can be helpful is to watch the fight back from the enemy's perspective. At the start of the video, I talked about how like, you know, you want to be that annoying player to fight. And when you fight someone who's annoying, you want to try to emulate that. Watching your own fights back from the enemy's perspective can go a long way in kind of exposing what you actually look like and what it looks like to fight you. So if you've never done that before, you know, play a few games, just play and then go back later and look at it and see what you look like from the enemy's perspective. Because I think a lot of times people will be surprised. I know I am. I don't really watch my own gameplay back often in terms of that. But when editing videos, I do. And there's times where I see things and I'm like, why did I even do that? Or why did I think that was good? You know? So watching the fights back from the enemy's perspective can really be eye-opening. And it's not like something you need to do every day or spend like 30 minutes on a day. Just do this once. It'll be pretty quick. And you might be surprised. And then the final thing, I think, is just that being decisive really, really helps. This is another thing that stands out when I make spectating videos is when somebody looks uncomfortable and when they're very indecisive or not confident in what they're doing, it's so much harder for them to play the game, I think. So just, even if what you're doing is wrong and bad, you know, you'll play it out. Maybe you die, maybe you win. But either way, you just go next. If you try to do something and then get scared and then don't do it and then think about doing something else, like if you're just never committing to anything, you're never actually doing anything. And I think a wrong play or a bad play that you commit to is so much better than a decent play that takes way too long to like kind of arrive at in a game like Fortnite where milliseconds can really matter in fights and timing can really matter. So try to be decisive and it can go a long way in helping you improve on top of everything else I already talked about in this video. Some of the gameplay in this might have been a bit older, like a week or two, just because I wanted to get some decent examples of some of the things that I was talking about. But that is going to be it for this video. As always, if you guys did find this to be helpful, informative, interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.